This video is about the thought and philosophy of Yukio Mishima, perhaps the best known Japanese author of the 20th century. He is mainly known for his fiction, but this video will deal with one of his non-fiction works, namely Sun and Steel. Sun and Steel recounts Mishima's experiences with, and reflections upon, his bodybuilding and martial arts training. Before we delve into the book, I would like to say a few more things about the man. In his youth, Mishima was a weak and bookish boy who was thought to have tuberculosis. This led to his rejection from the Japanese army during the war, but also to a general sense of inadequacy. Reflecting on his youth, Mishima said, "How dearly indeed I loved my pit, my dusky room, the area of my desk with its pile of books. How I enjoyed introspection, shrouded myself in cogitation. With what rapture did I listen for the rustling of frail insects in the thickets of my nerves." In other words, Mishima's mind was overstimulated and his body was understimulated. As a consequence, he was weak and had a nervous sensibility. In 1952, Mishima visited Greece and discovered Greek sculpture. These sculptures inspired Mishima to begin bodybuilding. They convinced him that beauty and ethics are one and the same. Creating a beautiful work of art and becoming beautiful oneself are identical. What did Mishima mean by this? What did he see in Greek sculpture? In order to answer these questions, we must turn to the sculptures themselves. In addition to immortalizing the physical prowess of ancient Greek athletes, I believe these statues captured some of the highest ideals of antiquity. In other words, the beautiful athletic body is framed in Greek thought not just as an aesthetically pleasing image, but as an ideal expression of a certain kind of soul. This is why Socrates said, "A sound mind in a sound body is a fitting foundation for all that is high and noble." The athletic body captured some of the highest and most noble ideals of classical Greece. These ideals were thumos, liberty, harmony, and kalokagathia, and they were taught to Greek children in the gymnasium rather than the classroom. Though these ideals are related, I will deal with each of them separately. In antiquity, the word liberal referred to someone who was a free man rather than a slave. The ancient concept of the liberal or the free man was, however, far more nuanced than our own. It did not just refer to someone who was free from slavery, but also someone free from the struggle for economic subsistence. In other words, someone was liberal by virtue of being able to do things for their own sake, and not for the sake of utility. This is what makes, or rather made, the liberal arts liberal. You participate in learning for its own sake, not because it will get you a job. Likewise, the Greeks admired the physique that was built for its own sake, rather than for the sake of utility. The manual labourer develops strength, but he does so for money, or because he must. The free man, by contrast, attends the gymnasium, which slaves were generally barred from, and makes a voluntary effort to achieve a muscular physique. Thus, the aesthetic appeal of these statues derives not only from their muscularity, but from their association with the noble voluntary effort one makes to achieve a balanced and harmonious body, something that can only be achieved by a free man. Thumos is a Greek word that roughly means spiritedness. It refers to that feeling of fire in the belly. The Greeks associated thumos with the desire for honor, distinction, and recognition. Like animals, humans strive for self-preservation, but unlike animals, we can ignore our basic survival instincts and risk our lives for the sake of something greater. This occurs when our desire for recognition is greater than our desire for self-preservation. In other words, it occurs when we are driven by thumos. Men are spurred to accomplish great things, whether they be works of art, athletic feats, or acts of heroism, by thumos. A man with thumos distinguishes himself through acts of greatness. Statues, such as the charioteer of Delphi, capture this ideal perfectly. We see the charioteer doing his victory lap, as his team of horses is led at a slow walk around the track past the cheering crowd. He has distinguished himself from the other competitors, and in so doing, demonstrated his athletic superiority. The Greeks believed that thumos resided within the chest. A man with a developed chest was believed to possess thumos, or manly courage. This was because the chest sits between the head and the gut, which brings us to our third ideal, namely, harmony. Plato described the soul as consisting of three parts: a rational part, a spirited part, and an appetitive part. The appetitive part is associated with our animal instincts, which is to say, our desire for food, drink, and sex. It is symbolized by the gut or belly. The rational part is represented by the head. It is the quality we have most in common with the angels. The spiritual, sentimental, and virtuous part of man was represented by the chest. It is, as has already been noted, the seat of Thumos. A man without a chest is a man without sentiment, spirit, or the desire for recognition. Someone who is capable of thinking and desiring, but lacking in Thumos. Hence the quote from C.S. Lewis, "We make men without chests and expect from them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst." Harmony among these three parts of the soul was, in Plato's opinion, essential to living a good and noble life. To quote Socrates, the virtuous person harmonizes these three parts of himself like three limiting notes in a musical scale: high, low, and middle. In other words, one must be intelligent and rational, while simultaneously being spirited and passionate. The symmetrical physique of ancient Greek athletic statues represented and symbolized the harmony of these three parts. The developed chest symbolized the athlete's thumos or spiritedness. The small, flaccid penis represented his control over his appetites. And the serene look on his face represented the internal harmony of his soul. As should by now be apparent, the Greeks linked physiology with psychology. They believed that a beautiful physical appearance housed a beautiful soul. The word they used to describe this link was kalokagathia. It is a complex word deriving from two adjectives, namely kalos, meaning beautiful, pretty, and handsome, and agathos, meaning good, noble, courageous, and worthy of admiration. Hence, kalokagathia is defined as the beautiful and the good. In antiquity, that which was good was beautiful, and that which was beautiful was good. To quote Plato, "I affirm that the good is the beautiful." Likewise, the archaic Greek poet Sappho said, "He who is fair to look upon is good, and he who is good will soon be fair also." In other words, only he who is handsome, honest, and upright can be considered beautiful and therefore good. The ugly and malformed, which is to say, those lacking in proportion, do not fit into this category. Today, this sounds incredibly backwards. We believe that what is on the inside is more important than what is on the outside. This attitude can, in part, be attributed to Christianity. Medieval theologians often associated physical beauty with vanity, lust, and corruption of the flesh. They emphasized instead the inner beauty of the soul and its virtues. This is why Christians forbid the viewing of Greek athletic statues. From this we see a profound difference between pagan Greco-Roman culture and Judeo-Christian culture. The Greco-Romans worshipped the flesh, whilst the Christians criticized it. This difference is discussed by Machiavelli in the Discourses. The pagan religion deified only men who had achieved great glory, such as commanders of armies and chiefs of republics, whilst ours glorifies more the humble and contemplative men than the men of action. Our religion, moreover, places the supreme happiness in humility, lowliness, and a contempt for worldly objects, whilst the other, on the contrary, places the supreme good in grandeur of soul, strength of body, and all such other qualities as render men formidable. And if our religion claims of us fortitude of soul, it is more to enable us to suffer than to achieve great deeds. The statues that we have been discussing embody both the grandeur of soul and strength of body that Machiavelli was talking about, which is to say they capture the very spirit of antiquity. One of the highest ideals of antiquity was kalokagathia, the idea that the beautiful and the good are the same thing. This idea is now foreign to us, but many people are seeking to revive it. After witnessing these statues, Mishima said beauty and ethics are one and the same. Creating a beautiful work of art and becoming beautiful oneself are identical. He also claimed that Greece cured me of my self-hatred and my loneliness, and awoke in me a will to health in the Nietzschean sense. This will to health led him to adopt a bodybuilding regimen of 3 workouts a week, which he did for 15 years. He begins his essay, Sun and Steel, by saying, "If myself was my dwelling, then my body resembled an orchard that surrounded it. I could either cultivate that orchard to its capacity, or leave it for the weeds to run riot in. I was free to choose, but the freedom was not as obvious as it may seem. Many people, indeed, go so far as to refer to the orchards of their dwellings as destiny. One day it occurred to me to set about cultivating my orchard for all I was worth. For my purpose I used sun and steel. Unceasing sunlight and implements fashioned of steel became the chief elements in my husbandry. Little by little, the orchard began to bear fruit, and the thoughts of my body came to occupy a large part of my consciousness." When Mishima began his journey, he was, as has already been noted, a weak and bookish boy. He was obsessed with words, thought, reason, and intellect. He claims this obsession led him to overlook the body, which is to say, the entire physical side of human existence, a category that he associated with attributes such as passion, action, instinct, and courage. Mishima's view of the mind-body distinction was influenced by Nietzsche's book, The Birth of Tragedy. In that book, Nietzsche uses the term Apollonian and Dionysian to designate the 2 central principles in Greek culture. Apollo was the god of light, reason, and the mind, while Dionysus was the god of wine, revelry, bodily strength, and ecstatic emotion. Nietzsche believed the society of his time, and classical thinkers like Descartes, who actually denied the very existence of the body, emphasized the Apollonian at the expense of the Dionysian. This led to the rise of excessive rationalism, which began to stunt passion, beauty, spirituality, and courage. In his youth, Mishima neglected Dionysus. As a consequence, he became weak and timid. Mishima embraced sun and steel in order to reconcile Apollo and Dionysus, mind and body. In other words, he embraced sun and steel in an attempt to rekindle the spirit of antiquity. To quote him, "The groups of muscles that have become virtually unnecessary in modern life, though still a vital element of a man's body, are obviously pointless from a practical point of view, and bulging muscles are as unnecessary as a classical education is to the majority of practical men. Muscles have gradually become something akin to classical Greek. To revive the dead language, the discipline of steel was required. To change the silence of death into the eloquence of life, the aid of steel was essential." In other words, the aid of steel enabled Mishima to adopt the ideals of classical Greece. Like the ancient Greeks, he built his character through physical discipline. He developed his chest, and in so doing, his thumos. As has previously been noted, thumos is the desire for recognition. To quote Rodica Frentua, "The desire for recognition seems to be the psychological source of 2 passions, religion and nationalism. The believer values everything his religion considers sacred, moral laws, way of life, or objects of worship, just as the nationalist does for his national or ethnic group. Older or newer forms of recognition, not entirely rational, religion and nationalism have most often been the propagators, hidden behind something called higher ideology, of the fight for recognition and the source of strong conflict." Mishima was living in a conquered nation that had rejected traditional values in favor of modernity, which is to say, it had exchanged thumos for a quiet life with increasing material prosperity. During Mishima's time, the average Japanese citizen had become what Nietzsche called the last man. The last man is a man without a chest, being able to desire and reason, but lacking entirely in thumos, which is to say, lacking in higher ideals, whether they be artistic, nationalistic, or religious. He avoids fight, danger, and risk, and focuses instead on equality, stability, and comfort. Mishima, being a man of high thumos, rejected contemporary Japan, so much so that he attempted a coup in 1970. The coup failed, and Mishima committed seppuku, a form of ritual suicide by disembowelment. Shortly before Mishima committed suicide, he said to his 800 troops, "We see Japan reveling in prosperity and wallowing in spiritual emptiness. We shall give it back, its image, and die in doing so. Is it possible that you value life, given a world where the spirit is dead?" The army protects the very treaty between Japan and the USA which denies its right to exist. Our fundamental Japanese values are threatened. The emperor no longer has his rightful place in Japan. To modern ears, this sounds insane. Very few of us are willing to die for our nation or religion, if we even have one. But perhaps this says more about us than about Mishima. Perhaps we are, as Nietzsche said, the last men of history, a group of men without chests, entirely lacking in thumos, men without any higher ideals who have been reduced to walking guts. Perhaps if we were to embrace the sun and steel, as Mishima did, we too would become men of high thumos and seek recognition rather than comfort. If you like this video, please subscribe. The channel is small and I am seeking to grow it in order to get the recognition that I am deserved. Alright, thank you for watching.
仕事をやっていますときに、なんか性の倦怠といいますか、ただ人間が自分のために生きようということだけには卑しいものを感じてくるのは当然だと思うのであります。それで、人間の生命というものは不思議なもんで、自分のためだけに生きて自分のためだけに死ぬというほど人間は強くないんです。というのは人間は何か理想なり、何かのためということを考えているので、生きるのも自分のためだけに生きることにはすぐ飽きてしまう。すると死ぬのも何かのためということが必ず出てくる。それが昔言われた大義というものです。そして大義のために死ぬということが人間の最も華々しい、あるいは英雄的な、あるいは立派な死に方だというふうに考えられている。しかし今は大義がない。これは民主主義の政治形態というものは大義なんてものいらない政治形態ですから当然なんですが、それでも心の中に自分を超える価値が認められなければ、生きていることすら無意味になるというような心理状態がないわけではない。